Hi everyone, my name is Mary D'Elia and I'm the Health and Fitness Director at the Albany YMCA. And I just wanted to say that Jack, who, as you know, this is being taped on for KALB, which is our local cable channel in Albany. And you can see it on channel 33. So these are the different things. KALB, the Albany channel, will be shown on Comcast channel 33 and AT&T Uverse channel 99. If you want to know afterwards, like if you wanted to share this with people, you can ask me. On Saturday at 11 a.m. and Sunday at 4 p.m. And can also be seen on YouTube starting tomorrow night on the KALB YouTube channel. The things you learn, isn't it amazing? So I also just want to put in, so I'm from the Albany Y, and we've been doing this collaboration together with the library for many years, and I just wanted to, some of you may not know about the Albany Y, I just want to make sure you all know that Albany has a fabulous YMCA, and it's located on Keynes Avenue, and we also have like childcare and then evening programming on Solano. So if you want any information, there's information in the back about our membership, and it's a great place to go and be just like this library. We're so lucky in Albany to have these two wonderful anchors. So I just wanted to make sure you knew about that. So I'm just going to introduce Vivian Jaquette, and she is going to introduce today's speaker. Yay.
Hi everybody, welcome to the library. I just wanted to let you know about a few upcoming events you might be interested in. Tomorrow night there will be a celebration of winter poems. So it's a poetry circle. You're welcome to bring a poem and share. Later in the month we will be having a showing of a documentary about the nativity scene on Mosier Avenue. If you know the guy, it used to be up on the Arlington, now it's there. So that will be showing twice as a matinee and as an evening program. And next month's brown bag will be somebody from Ashby Village, which is part of a growing movement of people staying at home versus moving to a retirement place and aging in place. So that should be interesting. And today I am pleased to welcome Bob Lewis from the Golden Gate Audubon Society. Bob, take it away.
Thank you, Vivian, and thank you all for coming. I wonder, Vivian, if it's possible to dim the lights on this, or... So, the title of this talk is A Fascination for Birds, and you may take this as kind of a warning. At least there are times when I wish I had, but very few. What happens when you get involved with birds is you get more and more sucked into the fascination of bird life. And so I'm going to kind of trace maybe my experiences and those of some friends. So this isn't exactly an autobiographical story, but it's kind of an agglomeration of stories. So usually a fascination with birds starts out with someone noticing, maybe for the first time, something going on in their backyard. Like maybe this robin nesting in the bush that you were just going to chop down, and so you don't. Or, well, at least in my case, as a kid, I grew up back east, and so I knew the eastern birds. I knew the robins and the blackbirds and the chickadees and so forth. Then I moved out here, and you know, birds are different on the West Coast than they are on the East Coast. And so my chickadee in my backyard was no longer my chickadee. I noticed it had a rusty back, and it's called a chestnut-backed chickadee. And we living in California may not realize that this little chickadee really is pretty much only in California. And people that come from the East Coast, especially birders that come from the East Coast, one of the things they really want to see is this little chestnut-backed chickadee. And isn't that cool? You have them in your backyard, they come to your feeders and everything else. So you kind of get interested in the birds in your backyard, and maybe you get attacked by a hummingbird or something, and that wakes you up. If you ever gone out to your hummingbird feeder, if you have hummingbird feeders, and the hummingbird comes and looks at you and wonders, what are you doing messing around with his feeder? And you try to tell him that really I'm just cleaning it, or I'm putting in new food and it's all right, and he's right here. And he has a very sharp bill. Anna's hummingbirds. So we get maybe 3 different kinds of hummingbirds in the year coming to our feeders. A couple of them in the spring and fall, and then Anna's stays around all year long. So if you get involved with what's happening in your backyard, you begin to notice that the birds are different. And sparrows, for example, peck on the ground, and they have these big conical bills, and they're eating seeds. And if you have a warbler, like maybe a Townsend's warbler, a yellow-rumped warbler comes into the pine tree next to your yard, and it's picking on bugs and things, and it has a little narrow bill, and so you begin to differentiate between these. And then, of course, if something strange comes in, you wonder, well, what's that? What's that? And so now you're hooked. So for me, I was walking along as a kid, walking along a little lake near us, and I noticed these little fuzzy birds. And I'd never seen little fuzzy birds before. And then I realized, oh my goodness, the little fuzzy birds aren't really, these were common moorhen, and they don't at all look like Mom. And not until Mom showed up did I realize what I was looking at. And so you begin to build up questions about, well, how many little birds does the big bird have? And how long does it take for them to grow up? And where do they go? And so forth. So some birds spend most of their time way up in the top of trees, like in top of a redwood tree, for example, like this golden crowned kinglet. And you don't see them because they're so high up. And unfortunately for me, I can hardly hear them because their voice is also way high up. But every now and then one will come down, and whoa, there's a new bird. Well, it's not a new bird. It's been up there all that time, but you just didn't know about it. And you begin to get more aware of your surroundings and the habitats that are there, because different birds are living in different places. And if you look up, maybe you see a big bird. And if you were lucky, this big bird had a fish in his talons, but I was unlucky. So the osprey nests now in San Francisco and Richmond, and so we're pretty lucky to have these big birds along our coastline. And indeed, we're pretty lucky living here, because we have so many different kinds of habitats right in almost in walking distance from the library. We can go down to the bay, we can go up to Tilden Park, and if we get in our car, we can go a little bit farther into the Central Valley, and oh my goodness, the things you can see, and the things that see you. This lives right at Cesar Chavez Park, and Golden Gate Audubon set up a little information area there to let you know about burrowing owls. These generally migrate from areas like Idaho and a little bit from Canada, and in the wintertime they come further south, and they kind of like the rocky shoreline around Cesar Chavez because it's full of ground squirrels, and it gives them burrows to live in, burrowing owl. So as you get used to the common birds that are around, then you may notice a bird that doesn't look right. And these are the uncommon birds. See, we divide birds into 2 groups, the common birds, the uncommon birds. And since birds have wings, birds don't have to stay where they're supposed to be. They can go where you didn't know they were supposed to be. And this is a yellow-billed loon. Normally we have 3 different kinds of loons along our coast here. We have the common loon, we have red-throated loon, and we have Pacific loon. We don't have yellow-billed loon. Yellow-billed loon belongs up in Alaska. But this one was at Bodega Bay, and that got me pretty excited. So, wow, there are birds I haven't seen yet. I thought I checked them all off. And then I walked out on the Berkeley Pier, and here was a redneck grebe. Well, redneck grebes are usually out in the ocean. And this one was in the bay, and it was right by the pier, and it was catching fish and posing for pictures, and wasn't that nice? This is the way they look in the winter. So a lot of birds have names like redneck grebe or ringneck duck that have nothing to do with the way they look. So actually, in breeding season, this has a redneck. But this is winter time. Yeah, both the males and females do. So that's, and then I was walking down near Costco. Costco, it turns out, is a bird magnet. There are all kinds of strange creatures that seem to come into the fields around and near Costco. Well, this is a Harris's sparrow. It took me years to see a Harris's sparrow. I've been looking I finally had to go into Canada quite a ways to see a Harris's sparrow. And then there I was, walking down the trail near Costco, looked up, and here's this Harris's sparrow sitting there in this berry bush. I said, well, for heaven's sake, so birds have wings. It's really exciting to find something really rare. And I was sitting home one day, just minding my own business, and the phone rang. And it was a friend, Emily Strauss, and Emily said, Bob, you've got to get down here right away, and you've got to bring your camera and take a picture of this bird, because I've just seen this bird. Actually, Emily has amazing ears, and she said, I heard this bird, and I knew it was nothing that I know. So she heard the bird go. That's it. And Emily knew, oh boy, it's something rare. And it turned out, indeed, it was a dusky warbler. Dusky warbler comes from Asia, from Kazakhstan. And it was trying to get away from the war, I guess. And it came over here. And it was sitting in the fennel. And so I came down with my camera, and there it was, and we took his picture, and it was, I guess, the first or second dusky warbler that had been seen in California, and Emily heard it and found it. So some people are really, really good at identifying birds, and the more you get involved, the better you get at trying to figure out what you're looking at. So you get sucked in, and maybe you take a class, or maybe just buy a field guide, or maybe you get a big spotting scope, or a giant lens on a camera, and maybe you travel to faraway places, and it's all because of these birds. And that's what happened to me. So you don't have to go that far. If you go into the Central Valley and take a ride up maybe north of Sacramento, or just a little bit south of Sacramento to the Cosumnes River Sanctuary, or go a little bit farther north to Sacramento Wildlife Refuge or the Colusa Wildlife Refuge, and you will see amazing things. And I've taken people up there, and they stand with their mouth open, and they look at the geese and cranes and swans flying over, and it's an emotional experience. It is very uplifting to see all of this going on. So these are snow geese coming in for a landing, and all you have to do is just go into the valley a little bit, and you'll see snow geese, and you'll see Ross's geese. I bet you thought that was the same species, didn't you? But see, now now you get to the fine-tuning thing. So that goose has what's called a grin patch. It has black lipstick on. And this goose doesn't have black lipstick, and it has gray carbuncles at the base of its bill. And it turns out they're indeed different species. They don't interbreed with one another. They summer in different places, but they winter together in the Sacramento Wildlife Refuge. And so all that kind of stuff about where do they go, and are they the same, or are they? You begin to pick up as you get interested in things. Why do these white geese have black wingtips? You know, I asked myself. I said, Bob, why is that? Well, okay, it turns out if you read up enough, they have a dye, a chemical called melanin in their wings, in the tips of their wings, that strengthens the wing structure. And then that keeps those wings out on the end there are moving fast against the air, and that keeps it from fraying and wearing out so fast. See, the geese discovered that, and they went out and got some. No, they didn't. That's the way they evolved. So sometimes you're looking at these white geese and you see what's called a blue goose. In every couple thousand white geese in California, there's a blue goose. Well, I wonder where he came from. Well, it turns out that on the bird that's called a snow goose on the East Coast is blue. They say that's blue. See, it's another one of those things about the redneck grebe. This is the blue goose. But indeed, it has maybe a little bit of bluish sheen in the right light. But on the East Coast, all the geese, all the snow geese that nest up in Canada on the east are blue. And on the West Coast, they're all white. Well, except for one or two. And in between, there's a little bit of a mix. And so it's two phases or two races of snow goose, two color phases, actually, or morphs, they call. And so here, it's kind of exciting to see if you can find the blue goose in the flock. Or maybe, instead of seeing a goose, you see a swan. And they're really big. And we just took a trip to the Central Valley just a couple days ago, and we had skeins of swans and geese and cranes all flying over. They don't have the black in their wingtips. They haven't figured that out yet. Maybe they're so big they don't need it. But there are thousands of tundra swan if you go to Marysville, near Marysville. And of course, there are sandhill cranes, big deal, sandhill cranes. Yeah, they are a big deal. They're about 5 feet high, and pretty impressive. And we saw lots and lots of sandhill cranes. And they'll be in the Central Valley until the end of February, maybe at Merced Refuge further south towards Las Banos, still at the Cosumnes Reserve and so forth. All the geese aren't white. Some of them are brown. This is called a white-fronted goose. White-fronted goose. The front on a goose is right there. I didn't know that until I started learning about birds. And that's why they call that a white-fronted goose. And there are lots and lots of these. And there's one flying away. But this is what you see. You see flocks coming in and flocks going out, and it's really quite a wonderful experience. And they're everywhere. And it's not just geese. There are all kinds of ducks that also winter in the Central Valley. And I just wanted to leaf through a few of them because they're so pretty. So this is a northern pintail, and indeed, they named this one right. It has a pointy tail, and when it's in flight, you can tell it's a pintail because it has a pointy head and a pointy tail. Northern pintail, this is green-winged teal. This is one of the smallest of the ducks, and it happens to be a favorite food of peregrine falcon. So they're always kind of watching up. There are some rare ducks, too. So this is called a Eurasian widgeon. We have an American widgeon that's pretty common. If you go just down to the tip of the Albany mudflats here and look out by the racetrack in the mudflats, you'll see American widgeon, and every now and then you might see a Eurasian widgeon. So the American widgeon has a gray head, and this one has a chestnut-colored head, and actually a golden stripe. The American widgeon has more of a silvery stripe. They're not really rare, but we see maybe 5, 6, 8 in the Bay Area every year. But this one is really, really rare. There's only one in California. And this is called a falcated duck, and it's at the Calusa Refuge, and this is the 3rd year that it's come back. And it's from Kazakhstan. We have some kind of link with Kazakhstan. And it just kind of migrated the wrong way along the Pacific. So instead of going down the east side of the Pacific, heading for Southeast Asia to spend the winter, it came down the west side of the Pacific and ended up in California. And it's excited the bird watchers to some significant degree. You don't have to go to the Central Valley, though, to see neat and pretty ducks. You can go to Lake Merritt, and that's just down here somewhere over in the next city there. Lake Merritt has some really pretty things. This one's called a hooded merganser. And at the outflow near Peralta College, oftentimes there'll be a hooded merganser in that little stream. This is a male. Or go to Richmond, look in the Richmond Harbor, and now and then a harlequin duck shows up. Harlequin ducks are usually a more northerly bird, but a few of them come down the coast. And boy, they're striking when you get them right. Harlequin duck. And then there's, I don't know if this one's really pretty, but it's really striking. This is a surf scoter, and surf scoters live mostly in the ocean. There are a few in Lake Merritt now and then, and they feed on mussels and clams, and they have that big bill because they use that to wrench the mussels off their tie to the rock, and then they swallow the shell and all. But you know, if you just had turkey, right? And you know, there's a gizzard in the turkey. And the gizzard is the muscle that grinds up things for birds. And so these birds have a big gizzard, and the shell goes in there and goes crunch, and then it regurgitates the shell and digests the animal. Surf scoter. It's really pretty to see shorebirds in flight. They fly together in a very syncopated thing, and there's another why. Why do they do that? How do they do that? And scientists have modeled the flight of shorebirds and on computers and tried to figure out when one turns, does the other one watch the one there turn and then does he turn? Or how do they all turn at once? Or what's the deal? And they've worked out equations and everything else to be able to put on your computer screen the flock of shorebirds turning and flying away from a peregrine falcon. But the shorebirds don't need computers, they just do it. So these are black-necked stilts, some of the most striking of our shorebirds with long pink legs. These are marbled godwits. They're a pretty good-sized bird. We have lots of them in our area, and yet they're a bird of concern because their population is dropping. And exactly why it's dropping, scientists say they don't exactly know, but it's got to be that habitat is diminishing for these birds because they nest in the middle of the country in prairie land, and prairie land is getting scarcer. Here's one taking off. These are a little bit smaller shorebird called a dowitcher. There are two kinds of dowitchers. There's long-billed dowitchers and short-billed dowitchers. And they have the same length bill. Not exactly, but it overlaps a lot. So the ones with the longest bills are really long-billed dowitchers. But otherwise, it's really hard to tell them apart, except in breeding season. Then they have fancy colors, and then you can tell who they are. But you can tell them apart in the winter. You listen for what they say. So birders then discover that it's not only a visual experience to see the birds, and it's certainly not if you go to Sacramento Refuge, where all the cranes and geese are. It's much more than a visual experience. It's also an oral experience. You hear the birds, and you hear masses of birds and noise and so forth. But these birds, when they take off, if it's a long-billed dowitcher, it says keek. And if it's a short-billed dowitcher, it says too, too. And that's how you know. So if you hang around the bay, and maybe you go around the bay, if you get to Redwood Shores, you might find Forster's terns. And Forster's terns nest there. And the adult terns bring food into the young because they're not adept at fishing yet. And the young make a lot of noise. And so you can tell when the adult is coming in with the fish. And when I'm trying to get a picture, I wait for the young bird to perk up and look excited, and then I start pushing the shutter because I know the adult is coming in at that point. And the young ones know who's mom or dad in all these birds that are flying around with fish. They can tell where their fish is coming from. Forster's tern. Go to Alcatraz in the spring. Oh, there are a lot of birds on Alcatraz. So there are western gulls that nest there, and this is a baby western gull. And western gulls are camouflaged with speckles and things. So if they were on a sandy beach, it'd be a little bit hard to see them. It's not too hard to see them on Alcatraz, and you see groups of these little western gulls. Also nesting there are Brandt's cormorants and snowy egrets and quite a variety of birds. And it's a fun trip to take from San Francisco over to Alcatraz in the spring and see these birds. Well, you know, I saw the birds in California kind of, and I was beginning to get my list all checked. And then I noticed that there were a lot of birds that aren't in California. So if you really want to see the birds that are in, like, the United States, then you have to travel a little bit. And unfortunately, when I lived on the East Coast, I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to what birds were there. So I missed out on all those birds. I didn't check. So I went to Florida. And there are birds in Florida. This is an anhinga. And I just sat and watched anhingas for quite a while. And I don't know whether that one was successful or not. But you can tell this one worked out okay. These are little anhingas, and little anhingas are really voracious eaters. So the adults go out, they catch fish, they hold them in their crop, which is down below their esophagus kind of, and then the young go down after them. I think that's how they learn to dive after fish, you see. Right? There's some really pretty birds in Florida. There's some kind of scrawny looking ones. Those are baby green herons, and this is the adult green heron here. I think they look better once they've grown up. Oh, that's not very nice. You're laughing. This is a double-crested cormorant, and we have double-crested cormorants here, but it seems like the ones in the east are a little bit more flamboyant than ours. You can actually see the double crests, and what an eye they have. So I got interested in different families of birds. So a family of birds is a group of birds the species are somewhat related to one another. So the shorebirds are a family, and there's maybe 10 or 20 different kinds of shorebirds, different species, but together they make a family. And the crows and ravens and jays all go together in a family called corvids. Well, there's a family in Florida called limpkins, and there's only one species in the family, and that's the limpkin. And there's only one, that's it, limpkin. There's more than one limpkin. There's his brother and his sister, but they're unique, and we find them in Florida. And they eat shellfish and snails, and this is a limpkin. So I checked off another family with that one. In Florida, there are a lot of herons, and the colors of herons are kind of interesting. The little blue heron is white when it's young. Its first year, it's white, and it looks just like the great egret. Well, not just like, but very much like it. And then when it gets to be older, it turns color. And so the color is an indicator to that species of bird, the little blue heron, that one over there is not a suitable mate. It's a teenager. But that one over there is good looking. And so they tell the age of the bird and whether they're suitable mates or not by the color of the bird. The great egret almost went extinct because of plume hunters collecting plumes for ladies' hats in the late 1800s. And now they've recovered a great deal. And they were actually one of the strong drivers for the formation of the Audubon Society, was the great egret. Here's a reddish egret, and it's shadow hunting. And so reddish egrets have figured out if they flare their wings out, they can make a shadow over the water and they can see the fish better. And so they fish in that way. And there are two different variations on reddish egret. One is colored like this, and the other one is white. And that doesn't have to do with age. So reddish egrets have just two different color morphs. This is an ibis. In Florida, they have white ibis. Here in our Central Valley, we have something called glossy ibis that are brown. But ibis have these decurved bills, and they're really good at catching frogs and other small creatures in wet meadows. And this one's caught some kind of creature, and then that gull has learned that the ibis usually drops what he catches for a minute. And that's bad news for this ibis because the gull will get it then. Well, if you're into trying to see a lot of different birds, you can't miss going to New England then, or the Atlantic states, because that's where the little songbird migrations happen. And songbirds like warblers, when they're in the springtime, they're coming up from South America and Central America, and they're flying all the way up into Canada. And they get to the Great Lakes, and they really, really don't like the idea of flying over the water. They don't like that because the air over the water is cooler, and so the air currents are dropping down, and so the bird gets pushed down a little bit, which means it has to work harder, and it's a long way across the lake. And so they stop before they go across the lake, and they eat a worm, and they think about it, and they eat a bug, and they talk to their friend, and then they build up courage, and then when the wind is just right, then they fly up, and then they kind of try to glide down across, but to get across the lake is with as much wind help as they can. So if you go to Ohio, along the shore of Lake Erie, there are places, little points of land that stick out into the lake, which make the trip for the bird a little bit shorter. And so the birds accumulate on those points of land, and you can go and see all kinds of really colorful warblers like common yellow-throat, Blackburnian warbler. This is black-throated green warbler. It's a blackpoll cerulean warbler. The cerulean warbler is kind of the poster child for shade-grown coffee. Because it flies all the way to Colombia in South America, not District of, but in South America. It flies to Colombia, and that's where it spends its winters, and then it breeds up in Ohio and in Canada. And when it's in Colombia, the type of habitat that it really likes is tall trees with shrubs. And it turns out that shade-grown coffee plantations are just the right kind of habitat for them. But unfortunately, we've all kind of gotten into the habit of drinking sun-grown coffee because the people who produce coffee can get more coffee out of the sun-grown plantations than they can out of shade-grown. You can get shade-grown coffee, and you can help the cerulean warbler out through several mail-order operations, and and hopefully the idea is growing. I've been to Colombia a few times, and there are plantations where people are very aware of the issue and are beginning to revert back from sun-grown to shade-grown. So hopefully that continues. Here's another little warbler called a northern parula, and it's only about 4 inches long, and it's flying all the way from Canada to Mexico. Or what about a yellow warbler? Well, yeah, what about a yellow warbler, he says. So, you know, it's not just North America or the United States that has birds. There are birds in other countries too. And it turns out that the birds in these other countries are different from the birds in North America, just like the East Coast and the West Coast have different birds. So if you go down to Central America, you find a whole bunch of birds that are all different again. And it's just like, wow, you can start your list all over and see all these new birds, and they have fancy names like trogon and honey creeper. So this is an orange-bellied trogon. This is a red-legged honey creeper. Here's a mot-mot, and that's what they say too. They say mot-mot. Notice their tail. They have a break in their tail where the barbs are pulled away, and it's a decorative kind of thing, like wearing an earring. They fancy up their tail. There are different hummingbirds in Central America. The center for hummingbird evolution was really South America, Ecuador and Colombia, and then the species dispersed from there and spread out. So we live on the edges of the hummingbird world. But if you go to Central and South America, you can see dozens of different kinds of hummingbird species. So this is called a scintillant hummingbird. And here's a different mot-mot. Here's a little coquette with a crest. So this is called red-capped manakin. And manakins have this wonderful habit of the males. The males get all together in a group, and they do a very complicated courtship dance. And a female will come in and watch this dance, and the males will really work hard and just wear themselves out, and then she'll leave. And the males try again with another female, and eventually one of the females will pick a male and they'll mate, and usually what happens is the male that's the kind of the senior dancer gets all the girls. And so the other dancers are dancing with the hope that that guy will drop dead. Or maybe, something bad will happen. Or maybe he'll twist his ankle. And then they can move up a notch or two. And until then, they just dance. There are a lot of tanagers in Latin America. And we have tanagers here. Western tanager, and it turns out our tanagers are actually cardinals. They've decided now, the taxonomist people, but their tanagers are tanagers. And this is one called crimson-backed tanager. This is called silver-throated tanager. And there are dozens of different kinds, and each one is brighter and more striking than the last. And they're parrots, not in cages. Parrots out in the wild, white-crowned parrot, red lord parrot. I like the feathers, the way they all stand out. They're striking. So there are a lot of countries in Central America and South America, and Golden Gate Audubon actually sponsors trips to a number of these places. I went on a trip to Belize and saw this wood rail and this vermilion flycatcher. And again, there are a lot of different species of birds that you don't see here. What would you think if that flew into your backyard? Collared aracari. And this is another manakin, and they do a different dance. So each species of manakin has its own dance. Well, then you can go really far. You can go to Africa, And actually, Audubon sponsored a trip to Africa some years ago, so I went on it. That's a lilac roller. There are not very many birds that are purple. The purple color actually blue color in bird feathers is not from blue dye. It comes from the structure of the feather and the way white light comes in and gets reflected out or scattered out. And if you took a blue feather and ground it up, it wouldn't be blue. Whereas if you took a red feather and ground it up, it's red because it has red dye and it has keratin. And so the purple is a mix of red dye and blue feather structure that creates the purple color. And that's a lilac roller. And these are storks, two different kinds of storks, saddle-billed and yellow-billed storks. This is in Botswana. So there are birds all over the world that may be related to one another. So this African eagle is actually quite closely related to our national emblem, our bald eagle. But it's not the same species. It's a fish eagle. And this bird here is proclaiming ownership of this territory and letting the other eagles know, not here, buddy. I have a friend who's gotten fascinated with hummingbirds, and he calls me up and says, let's go to X. I say, oh, really? I mean, that's far away, you know. And he says, right, I've got a plan to, and the next thing I know, I'm in Peru. So this is another coquette, a little rufous coquette, and it's a tiny little bird. It's 3.5 inches high, maybe. But boy, all 3.5 inches are there to let you know it's there. This is in Trinidad. So this part of the talk is just kind of a walk around the world a bit. Looking at different families, different species, different amazing things that you can see. So in Trinidad, there's a place called Asa Wright. It's an eco-tourism lodge, and you can sit on the porch. Just sit on the porch, and it rains outside, but it's not raining on the porch, and the birds are coming in right in front of you, and you see these honey creepers and tanagers and all these brightly colored things. And then when it stops raining, you take a little walk down a trail to the oilbird cave. And you're not allowed to go into the oilbird cave on your own. You have to go with a guide, because the oilbirds are sensitive to people, and so they want to protect them. And when you finally get there, after it's kind of a steep trail, and for this I was hauling a big camera on a tripod down this steep trail, and I made it all the way down, and then we were standing in a stream, and the guide was showing us there was an oilbird there. Well, you weren't allowed to use flash because you'll scare the birds. But he had a red or a weak flashlight that he would shine on it so you could see it, so I could focus. And then I just let the camera take a picture, and it took like a 1/2 minute picture. And this is what I saw when I looked into the camera, because you could barely see them otherwise. And so oilbirds are nocturnal birds. They're fruit eaters. And they go out at night to stealthily hunt fruit. You know, they creep up on a cherry or a peach or something. No, they're the only nocturnal fruit eater. And who knows why that is or how that developed. And they make the most awful noises. And so if you're asleep and there's a fruit tree outside your window, you hear this strangling baby shrieking outside, and it's just the oilbirds is all. So every bird has kind of a story. You know, blue-winged warblers, so this isn't so far away, this is in Ohio. There's another warbler called the golden-winged warbler. And they're two separate species. They look quite different from one another, but it turns out that they readily interbreed. And so they're not that different from one another, and their genes aren't so different that the offspring from these birds apparently are fertile. And so the blue-winged warbler is the dominant of the birds, and the golden-winged is recessive, and so golden-winged warblers are beginning to disappear because of this bird. Well, come on, it's not his fault. And he's quite pretty. I went to Colombia to photograph this bird. This was my friend who called up and say, "Oh boy, hummingbirds, we've got to go to Colombia." To get to where this bird lives, it lives on top of quite a high mountain in the Andes, and it's not just a mountain; it's a volcano. And it's a national park, the area where the bird is, and there's a sign about halfway up the road, and the sign was in Spanish. And I don't speak Spanish very well, but I looked at the sign and I was sure that it said, "Park closed because of active volcano." So I said to the guide, "Hey, what about that sign?" He said, "Yeah, that sign's always there." And we went right up on by, and we went up to the top, and there was a ranger up on top, and he said, "Oh, hi, you here to look for the hummingbirds?" And he said, "Yeah." Well, these hummingbirds, this particular hummingbird is called a bearded helmet crest. And it only feeds on a certain flower, and the flowers were in blossom at that time, and so we were able to finally find one of these and photograph it. And when we came down, later on, when I got home, I discovered that the people who study the birds, the taxonomists, discovered that really there are 4 species of helmet crests now, not just one. So now I have to go back and find 3 more. This is a European bird called a blue tit, and it's found in Poland. This one was, but they're all over Europe. They're in England and France and so forth. And this was nesting in this little hole in a large tree. This is a really vicious bird, the striated caracara. It's the top of the food chain in the Falkland Islands, and it hunts small penguins and small anything else, and so it's the hunter that, and also scavenger, that kind of cleans up the area, you know. And it looks kind of mean, doesn't it? I think this was on the advertisement for this. This is in Madagascar, and Madagascar has some amazing birds and also mammals, lemurs and things like that. This little guy was fishing, and we were in a boat, and we were just kind of lolling in the boat, watching what was going on, taking his picture. And every time he dove in the water and came back up, he changed his hairdo. This is on another amazing place. I gave a talk called "The Ends of the Earth," and this really is the end of the earth. It's South Georgia Island, and that's off the tip of South America, just above Antarctica. And it's one of the richest places in the world for wildlife. It's full of elephant seals and fur seals and albatross and penguins and fulmars and all kinds of things, and rats. And the rats were introduced by whalers and sealers. And now the British government, which governs South Georgia, and South Georgia has almost no people on it, so it's hard, there's not a whole lot to govern, except a 100-mile long, 35-mile wide island full of all this wildlife. And so they're trying to remove the rats. And it turns out that the island is separated into segments by glaciers, and the rats don't cross the glaciers. So you can remove rats from one area and then slowly work your way around the island, cleaning up the island. They use poison, And this is the third year of the rat eradication program, and the last year if it's successful. And if it is, right now the populations of a number of species of birds have been reduced by 95% on South Georgia. So a wonderful place will explode with bird life if that really happens. The rats eat the eggs of nesting birds. They eat the young birds. It's a problem. So I'm coming to the end of my story. If I've managed to interest you, you really should join Golden Gate Audubon. And if you're not a member, you should be, okay? So just go online, or their office is on San Pablo Avenue, and you can just drop by there. And if you're looking for me, that's my email address down on the bottom there. And I teach classes and lead field trips and things like that, and give talks, and it's a lot of fun to get involved with birds. So I want to thank you for listening. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I just wanted to compliment you. Your slides are just absolutely beautiful.
Oh, that's kind of you to say. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I was just wondering, how long is your bird list?
There are about 10,000 species of birds in the world, and I've seen around 4,400 or so. So I have a whole long way to go. Yes, ma'am.
I've been walking at Sylvan Park, inspired by one of your students who loved birds and went with you on many trips. But I never gotten a bird to pose for me.
Well, now I wonder why that is. Is it something you said? So the question was, I've been walking in Tilden Park and I've seen a lot of birds, but I never get a bird to pose for me. So it's really, patience is a virtue, and I've heard that anyway. So you can watch where, especially if a bird is nesting or something like that, it will come back and it will perch often on the same branch before it goes to the nest with a food item, and that's a chance for posing when that happens. If you're at the shore, you can position yourself in a way where as the tide comes in, the birds get forced towards you. There are tricks to do it. You can, some people, it's called pishing, and sometimes some birds will come to you, like song sparrows will do that, and fox sparrows will come towards you when that happens. Yeah. But it's a challenge if you're trying to photograph them, to get them to come close. Plus, if you have a really big lens, that helps. Yeah. Anything else?
I haven't seen many burrowing owls at Cesar Chavez this year.
There's at least one that's been there. I know last year there were maybe 5. So these are transient birds. So they're doing what's called post-breeding dispersal. So they leave their nesting area and they just spread out. And so sometimes they land here and sometimes they don't. And it doesn't mean that all our birds died from last year, because they don't winter the same place every year. Hopefully there's more habitat and they're spreading out a little more. Yeah.
That falcated.
I have an app on my iPad that might be for some people. As I remember, it was free. I have had it for some years. That has bird songs, yes. Hundreds of and you can organize it by locale.
Yeah.
So I know I made tremendous use of it when I was in Hawaii last, that I could pin it down to that particular area of the world, and just, because often you hear birds but you can't see them.
Yeah.
Or maybe you see them but you still don't know what it is, but you still also hear them, and then you can check out their song.
And there's a lot of software now to help the birder. Some of the bird song things are get a little bit misused. Playing the song to draw the bird in, and then playing the song again to get the bird excited, and the bird wears itself out. And think about some of these birds have been flying for thousands of miles, and they're mostly interested in feeding now. But learning the songs, like you're talking about, is a big help. Yes.
We had an occasional visitor, a neighborhood mockingbird, and I've never heard so many varied songs. Is that really unusual, or do other birds have a whole, repertoire of songs?
So there are birds that learn songs as they get older. The passerines, the perching birds, which includes your mockingbird, are learners. There are other birds that are born with a song, and that's it. That's all they can sing, and that's really all they can sing, and they don't learn anything. So some of them learn songs first from their father, and they have kind of a template. And then they move to a new area, and then they adjust their song to fit the accent and so they begin to sound like New Yorkers instead of Californians.
They also do another wonderfully quirky thing. They're usually at the very top of a tall tree, and they flutter their wings and lift straight up and come down. We've seen it. It's just so funny and silly.
I have a friend in the audience here who had a mockingbird on his chimney, and he's a musician, and it was singing all night long. And so he recorded the mockingbird, and he played the song back up the chimney at a significant volume, and that was the end of the mockingbird. I'm not sure I got that story exactly right. Yes, ma'am.
I lived in Santa Cruz and for quite a long while, and there was a lot of mockingbirds in the area. And one mockingbird learned the sound that the light when for crossing for blind people, it would go beep, beep, beep. And it learned that, and there was a resident blind person, so she had to have a dog actually guide her. But it was interesting that bird learned how to
imitate that. I had a starling. I lived in Holland for a while, and I had a starling outside the window that rang like my telephone.
I wonder, do some birds have a sense of rhythm? Because I was at a concert one time, it was outdoors, and the bird went up and down in time to the music.
I've seen YouTube things of parrots, parrots doing that, dancing parrots and so forth. So apparently they do, or some of them do. The capabilities of different species of birds varies widely. So if you say one species can do it, it doesn't mean that all birds do it. Parrots, for example, are a lot sharper than other birds. Apparently parrots have names for themselves. So baby parrots are called by their parents, Fred and Charlie, and Fred knows he's Fred, and as he grows up, other birds call him Fred. So that's pretty amazing. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
How long do birds live? I assume
It varies a great deal. So the small birds may live 2 or 3 years. An albatross may live 70 years.
70?
Yeah, there was just a case of an albatross raising a chick that was 60-some years old on Midway Island. Yeah, parrots live a very long time. Of course. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much.